Imagine for a moment the scent of bleach clinging to your skin, the echo of your own footsteps in an empty marble lobby, the weight of other people's carelessness settling into your bones. Now imagine carrying all of that every single night, knowing that not a soul truly sees you. That's how Helen survived, by blending in, by becoming part of the architecture. She watched, she listened, she learned. In every whisper, every half-finished coffee cup left in the boardroom, every crumpled document tossed toward the trash and missing, her world existed in the spaces others overlooked: the fingerprint on the glass, the lipstick stain on a mug, the hurried apologies that sounded more like commands. This isn't a story about being invisible. It's a story about what happens when the invisible decide to leave a mark no one can wash away. Every building has its own sound after midnight. The office tower at 55 West Monroe wasn't an exception. You could hear the groan of the elevators settling for the night, the distant hum of air conditioning ducts, the lonely click of Helen's cartwheels on polished stone. Helen preferred the graveyard shift. Less chatter, less scrutiny. She'd learned the art of invisibility as a child in Detroit, but Chicago gave her new ways to practice. Uniform pressed, hair tied tight, face carefully neutral. She had perfected a smile that said, "Don't worry about me," without ever moving her lips. People rarely spoke her name if they even remembered it. Most called her Miss, or worse, snapped their fingers for attention when their coffee spilled. A few, always the ones in tailored suits and expensive watches, never met her eyes at all. Helen kept her head down, moving through her checklist: wipe, spray, scrub, repeat. On nights when her hands ached and her mind wandered, Helen would hum quietly, songs from her grandmother, old church hymns, verses in languages she no longer dared speak aloud. Each lyric was a reminder she was more than her uniform, more than her work. She moved through empty boardrooms, careful not to disturb the leftover PowerPoint slides blinking from projectors. In the executive restroom, she found a silk scarf left behind, stained with lipstick. The initials, embroidered in gold, belonged to the VP of Finance. Helen made a note, knowing someone would be frantic in the morning. She wiped down the conference table, her eyes catching a document half hidden under a folder. Out of habit, she read the first few lines. French. Legal memo about a deal with a foreign bank. She glanced around, heart quickening, but tucked it back exactly as she found it. She never stole. She only read. In her world, knowledge was a form of survival. Helen's shift ended at sunrise. As the city came alive, she slipped out the back entrance, melted into the crowd, and became just another tired face on the bus home. No one greeted her. No one noticed the weariness in her eyes. That's how she liked it, until the day she didn't. What makes a person stay in a place where no one sees them? Helen wasn't sure, but she was about to find out what happens when someone finally does. The cafeteria at night was a kingdom of echoes. The clatter of a lone tray, the hum of a vending machine, the static of a radio left on low for company. Helen always took her break late, when the building felt abandoned, when no one would ask why she wasn't just grateful to be there. She sat near the window, cradling a mug of lukewarm coffee, eyes on the storm, moving in over Lake Michigan. The city lights shimmered in the puddles below, neon blues and sodium orange, painting her reflection into something almost unrecognizable. She pressed her fingers to the glass, tracing the skyline, remembering a time when she'd believed she could belong to any place she set foot in. A voice jolted her back to the present. "You mind if I sit?" Helen glanced up. It was Rosa, one of the security guards, stocky, kind eyes, a mother of 3 who'd emigrated from Honduras. Helen nodded, shifting her bag aside. They spoke in Spanish, their voices soft, slipping into the comfort of a language that didn't belong to this office. Rosa talked about her children's school, the price of groceries, the ache in her feet. Helen listened, offered stories of her own, a mother who read poetry in Wolof, a father who taught her to cook okra stew with only salt and hope. For a moment, they weren't cleaner and security. They were women who knew how to survive, how to hide the best parts of themselves in plain sight. After Rosa left, Helen lingered, replaying the words in her mind. There was something powerful about being able to switch tongues, to slip unnoticed between worlds. English in the halls, Spanish in the break room, French in her dreams, even snippets of Russian and Mandarin for the rare nights she felt daring. Each language a shield, a code, a map of where she'd been and who she'd had to become. That night, as she cleaned the legal department's office, she overheard a heated phone call in Mandarin. Helen froze, mop in hand. The voice on the other end barked orders, demanding changes to a contract, references to exclusivity and commissions. The executive in the room muttered in English, thinking she was alone. Helen caught every word. She committed it to memory. The world was a puzzle, and every language was a piece. In her tiny apartment before bed, Helen wrote it all down. Words, names, the shape of the threats made. She wasn't sure why she kept these notes, except that someday someone might finally ask her what she saw. There was a hallway on the 27th floor where the lights flickered every night at exactly 2:13 a.m. Helen had memorized the rhythm. 2 slow blinks, then total darkness for a heartbeat, as if the building itself paused to listen. She'd grown expert at reading the secret language of spaces. The way a locked door meant more than security. The way a tilted picture frame could signal a message left behind. That night, after finishing her routine on the lower floors, Helen took the service elevator to the executive level, as she sometimes did when the city felt too heavy to carry. The marble gleamed under her steps. She passed the glass-walled offices, each one filled with the ghosts of conversations, arguments, ambitions, regrets. Her mop left a clean trail behind, proof she'd been there, even when no one would remember. Near the IT department, she noticed something odd, a security camera angled away. From the main hall, pointing toward a storage closet, Helen paused, sensing a story in the air, a tension too thick to be coincidence. She continued, pretending not to notice, but on her way back, she saw a shadow slip behind the glass. A man in an expensive suit, phone pressed to his ear, whispering in French. He shot a look over his shoulder, then disappeared into the server room. Helen's hands trembled. It wasn't just the fear of being caught where she didn't belong. It was the realization that she was watching something she wasn't supposed to see. She memorized his features: salt and pepper hair, sharp jaw, wedding band. The way he flinched when the emergency exit alarm chirped from 2 floors below. The building held secrets within its walls, and Helen was starting to collect them. That week, other oddities appeared. Stacks of shredding bags in the copy room, an executive assistant in tears in the stairwell, a delivery man escorted out by 2 men in suits. The air was heavy with anxiety, and Helen found herself walking softer, listening harder. She shared a knowing glance with Kwame, the night porter, as he passed with his trash cart. He never said much, but his eyes spoke volumes. It was a silent agreement between the invisible, those who kept the gears turning, who saw everything, who spoke only when it was safe. Helen made notes: times, faces, languages spoken, details that would seem irrelevant to anyone else. She wasn't sure what it all meant, but the building was talking to her in ways that didn't require words. And in the darkness, where no one looked, Helen watched and waited. If you stood still long enough in the service corridors, you could hear the building breathe, the thrum of generators, the far-off murmur of water in the pipes, the quiet chorus of conversations never meant for the corner office. It was here, away from the polished floors and glass partitions, that Helen found the stories that never made it into company reports. She wasn't alone. In her invisibility, there was Kwame, always first to arrive, last to leave. He kept a photo of his daughter taped inside his locker, her gap-toothed smile brighter than any fluorescent bulb. Sometimes Helen caught him humming a lullaby in Twi as he scrubbed the baseboards, lost in another world. Kwame's English was precise, learned late and with effort, each word shaped by necessity. Downstairs in the kitchen, Maria ran the graveyard shift, eyes sharp, movements quicker than the mice she swore didn't exist. Her hands never stopped, chopping, rinsing, packing meals for executives who'd never know her name. But Maria's laughter filled the narrow space between stove and prep table. a rebellion against the silence demanded by her supervisors. Even old Mr. Tompkins, the elevator mechanic, had a story. 42 years in the same building, he said, had taught him two things: never trust a fire alarm, and never believe a suit who smiles too easily. He limped from floor to floor, his toolbox battered but his mind razor sharp. Once he winked at Helen and said, "The real bosses are the ones you never see coming." Some nights, Helen found herself drawn to these quiet spaces. She became a collector of moments: Rosa's soft prayers whispered over coffee, Maria's dreams of opening a bakery, Kwame's plans to send his daughter to college. She listened, asked questions, shared her own stories in return. In the staff restroom, someone had taped up a comic strip, a janitor with a superhero cape flying over a skyscraper unnoticed. Underneath, a note in careful handwriting read, "We save more than they'll ever know." For the first time, Helen felt the beginnings of something she hadn't allowed herself in years: belonging. Here in the company of the overlooked, her languages mattered. Her memory was an asset, her perspective a map. She found strength in their resilience, a silent alliance against the daily indignities handed down from the top floor. And as the stories stacked up, Helen realized she was part of something larger, a network of witnesses, each carrying pieces of truth the company would rather erase. What happens when the people who see everything finally start to speak? Helen didn't know, but she was ready to find out. Some nights the building seemed to exhale secrets. Tonight, the tension was thick even before Helen stepped onto the executive floor. She could feel it in the way the lights buzzed, in the hurried footsteps echoing from the direction of a boardroom. There was a nervousness in the air, as if the walls themselves expected trouble. Helen was almost done with her checklist, polishing the brass at reception, emptying bins lined with expensive shredded paper, when she heard raised voices near the elevators. She pressed herself against the cool marble, silent, the way only someone used to being overlooked could manage. Two men in dark suits, arguing in French. Their words tumbled over each other, clauses, deadlines, accusations of sabotage. A third man, younger, shuffled awkwardly, his hands shaking as he fumbled with his phone. Helen caught a phrase: exclusivité annulée. Cancelled exclusivity. Millions of dollars at stake. A deal about to collapse. One man's voice cracked, desperate. "It's the translation. Something is wrong. We'll look like fools. The contract is ruined." The others glared at him, silencing his panic. Helen's pulse raced. She knew this deal. She'd read the draft weeks ago while dusting the boardroom. She'd noticed the differences then, how the Mandarin version contained an extra clause, how the French was subtly different from the English. Without thinking, she cleared her throat. "Excuse me," she said, keeping her eyes down, as if asking permission to pass. The room went still. The older man snapped, "Not now!" But Helen spoke softly, in perfect French, her accent flawless. "I believe the issue is with Article 9, Paragraph 3. The clause in the Mandarin contract allows for concurrent partnerships. Your French and English versions do not." Stunned silence. The men stared as if seeing her for the first time. The younger one stepped forward, voice shaky. How did you know that?" Helen shrugged, switching to Mandarin, then back to English. "It was on the conference table. The translation didn't match. If your Chinese partners sign this, you lose control of the distribution rights." The older man recovered first, his face turning red with fury, and then something like, "Respect. You read all our contracts?" Helen hesitated. "Only the ones people leave behind. I just clean up after the mess." A beat passed. Then the older man nodded, brusque. "Wait here." Minutes later, Helen was ushered into a private office. She expected scolding, maybe even threats. Instead, the director leaned forward, eyes sharp. "We need someone who can catch these things. You want to move up?" Helen met his gaze, steady. "I want a fair contract, sir, for everyone." He laughed, not unkindly. "We'll see what we can do." When Helen left that night, the building felt different, charged with possibility and with risk. She wasn't invisible anymore, at least not to those who mattered. But as she stepped into the elevator, her heart twisted. Being seen was not the same as being safe. What happens when the people in power realize you're no longer part of the background? For Helen, the answer was just beginning to take shape. and it would change everything. Helen had walked every inch of the building for years, but there was one place she'd never entered, the golden elevator. It gleamed at the end of the executive corridor, separated by a glass barrier that only opened to those with the highest level badges. Most nights, Helen just passed by, eyes down, pretending she didn't notice the way the directors glanced at their reflections before stepping in, as if the gold leaf could polish away whatever they'd done during the day. But now, for the first time, her badge worked. She held her breath as the doors whispered open, revealing an interior so bright and spotless it felt unreal. The walls reflected her image in 10 different shades, her brown skin, her blue workshirt replaced by a new blazer, her posture uncertain but proud. A security guard greeted her by name. "Morning, Ms. Johnson." She nodded back, still getting used to the sound. Her name, spoken out loud, carried a different weight here. The elevator climbed in silence, so smooth it barely felt like movement. Helen stared at the panel. No numbers, just floors marked by names. Summit, Vista, Zenith. She pressed Summit. The doors closed, and for a moment she was suspended between everything she'd ever been told she couldn't have and the future she hadn't yet chosen. When the doors opened, she stepped into a new world, gone were the flickering lights and scuffed baseboards. Here, everything shimmered. Designer chairs, live plants under skylights, the hush of expensive carpeting. Helen walked slowly, aware of every glance that followed her. Curiosity, suspicion, envy. Her new desk was glass and steel, facing a wall of windows with a view of the whole city. On it, a small brass nameplate, Helen Johnson, International Compliance. She ran her fingers over the engraving, almost unable to believe it was real. Her first day in the new role was a blur of meetings and introductions. Some smiled warmly, others with a tightness that said, "Watch your step." She kept her notes, organized, her answers precise, her face calm. But beneath the surface, Helen noticed things others missed. A director's careless aside in Russian, an intern's panic when asked about missing files, a janitor's hurried glance as she passed with her mop. And every time she took the golden elevator, she saw her own face reflected back, a reminder that nothing in this world was given freely. At lunch, she sat alone, watching the flow of conversation around her. She caught fragments in French, Mandarin, Portuguese. Once, she heard her own name, spoken with surprise, then laughter, then a hush as she entered the room. By the end of the week, Helen knew the elevator was more than a symbol. It was a threshold. Crossing it had given her access, but not acceptance. And every ascent left her a little further from the people she used to work beside, from the quiet alliance of the unseen. That night, she rode the elevator alone, the city lights glittering far below. For the first time in a long while, Helen wondered if she was climbing towards something worth reaching, or if the air at the top was too thin to breathe. What does it cost to be seen by those in power? For Helen, the price was only starting to reveal itself. It started with a polite email, subject, "Your unique perspective." Helen read it twice, the lines between the words sharper than the words themselves. She was invited, no, summoned, to an after-hours informal gathering in the Zenith Conference Suite, a place she'd never seen before. The sender was Susan Lee, Vice President of Public Affairs, whose smile was always perfect, even when her eyes said otherwise. Helen arrived early. The Zenith Suite was glass-walled at the top of the building, filled with expensive wine and conversation that buzzed with the careful energy of politics. She recognized a few faces, senior managers, department heads, a lawyer from HR who never quite looked anyone in the eye. Susan greeted her warmly, pulling Helen into a circle of executives. "We're so glad you could join us, Helen. We think you're the perfect person to help us refine our internal processes. As someone who's seen so much up close," she smiled, as if granting a favor. The conversation shifted. Suddenly, Helen wasn't just a guest. She was the example, the token of diversity, the proof that the company was listening. People asked her for opinions on reports she hadn't read, for input on policies written in legalese, for her thoughts on the cleanliness of company culture. It didn't take long for the tone to change. Someone, Derek, head of compliance, leaned in close, his voice low. "We need your help, Helen. There are some documents we'd rather disappear. Some stories best left untold. You understand how these things work, right?" Others laughed as if it were a joke, but the tension behind their smiles was real. Helen smiled tightly, her mind racing. She remembered the faces in the break room, the stories she'd collected, the workers who had no voice in this room. Susan poured her a glass of wine. "It's all about teamwork here, Helen. We trust you, and you can trust us too." The message was clear. Loyalty was expected, and silence was priceless. Helen excused herself, escaping to the balcony. The city sprawled below, a living mosaic of lights and shadows. For a moment, she let the cold air fill her lungs, fighting the urge to run. She felt a presence beside her. It was Rosa, the security guard, working overtime for extra cash. She handed Helen a napkin. On it, a single sentence in careful Spanish: "They use us, then forget us. Don't let them use you too." Helen closed her eyes, the truth pressing heavy on her chest. What do you do when an invitation is really a trap? For Helen, the answer would define everything that came next. Helen sat at her new desk, fingertips pressed lightly to the cool glass, trying to steady her nerves. The words from the Zenith suite clung to her skin like a film. Loyalty, discretion, trust. She replayed every detail. Who laughed, who didn't, whose eyes flickered with warning. By noon, she'd already received 3 requests from executives. "Could you review this audit report before tomorrow? Do you mind checking the translation on this contract? But please don't mention it to anyone in legal. Keep this just between us, will you, Helen?" The requests piled up, each one layered with a thin veneer of politeness over something darker. Some were mistakes to be corrected, others documents to forget entirely. The lines between favor and cover-up blurred. Helen's inbox filled with memos marked confidential. She heard whispers as she passed in the hallways, saw doors close quickly when she approached. Colleagues who'd welcomed her the week before now looked past her, wary. She was on the inside, but never fully in. The pressure was relentless. Some nights she stayed late, alone with her thoughts and the city's distant rumble outside the glass. Her phone buzzed with anonymous messages. "Keep your mouth shut. Remember who gave you that office. You think you belong up here? Think again." Sometimes there was nothing, just a sense that the building itself was watching her. She started to notice a pattern. Employees who disagreed with directives quietly reassigned, emails that disappeared from her archive, CCTV footage that glitched whenever she lingered in certain hallways. She caught Maria crying in the stairwell, clutching a pay stub that didn't match her. Hours. Helen comforted her, then realized that she herself had no one to confide in. She kept a folder hidden under her desk. Photocopies, handwritten notes, timelines of odd transactions, a growing record of every time she was asked to make something clean. One day, Susan cornered her after a meeting, her tone syrupy sweet, but her grip on Helen's arm hard enough to bruise. "You're doing well, Helen. Don't get distracted. This is a big opportunity. Don't let it slip away." The message was clear. That night, Helen walked home instead of taking the bus. The city lights blurred as she replayed her choices. She had always believed hard work could wash away almost anything, but some stains sink deeper, hidden under the shine. She wondered if she was becoming what they wanted, someone with hands just dirty enough to stay silent. As she reached her building, she found an envelope wedged in her mailbox. Inside, a photo of her at work, taken through the glass. No note, just the image, a threat in silence. Helen's hands shook, but her resolve hardened. How much of their dirt could she carry before she couldn't wash it off? How much of herself would she lose to their secrets? On Thursday night, a storm rolled in from the lake, rattling the windows on every floor. The city flickered in and out of darkness, headlights swimming through rain. Helen worked late, restlessness keeping her moving even after everyone else had gone. Shortly after midnight, the building trembled. The emergency lights snapped on, casting long shadows across the marble. The main power was out. The silence was heavier than usual, broken only by the distant roll of thunder. Helen's badge still worked on backup power. She slipped into the executive wing, heart pounding. The golden elevator was offline, but the service stairs were open. She climbed, breath shallow, senses sharpened by adrenaline and fear. On the 30th floor, she paused. Voices drifted from the main conference room, tense, hurried, not meant for her ears. She recognized them, Susan, Derek. A third voice she only heard on calls. They spoke in urgent whispers, a rapid-fire blend of English and French. Helen pressed herself against the door, straining to catch the details. "Shut it down before the auditors come. If that file gets out, we're finished. Where's the backup? Just erase the cameras. Who's going to notice? Nobody cares about the night crew anyway." A jolt of anger surged through Helen. She crept away, careful, not to be seen. In the IT office, she found the old backup drives, forgotten during the rush to digitize everything. She pocketed one, hands shaking. The building was dark, but the truth was still lit up, waiting to be seen. She made her way to the sub-basement, where the hum of generators vibrated in the floor. There, she found Kwame checking the water pumps. "The storm's messing with everything," he grumbled, not looking up. Helen nodded, sliding the drive into her pocket, careful to keep her fear hidden. Later, she slipped into the archives, a cramped room filled with old paper files and a single ancient computer still wired to the security system. She powered it up, heart racing. On the screen, she watched video feeds flicker. Susan and Derek moving documents, switching off cameras, arguing in low voices. Helen recorded everything on her phone, careful to capture faces, times, words. Suddenly, a flashlight beam swept across the room. Helen ducked behind a file cabinet, holding her breath. Footsteps approached, slow and deliberate. She recognized the rhythm, Mr. Tompkins, the elevator mechanic. He stopped by the door, eyes scanning the shadows. "You're not the only one watching, Helen," he whispered, almost too soft to hear. "Be careful." Then he was gone, leaving her alone with the glow of the screen and the echo of his warning. Helen hid the drive in the false bottom of her cleaning cart. She left the archives, nerves raw, the truth burning in her pocket. Would exposing their secrets finally set her free, or put her in more danger than she could imagine? Tonight, for the first time, Helen felt the answer shifting in the darkness, close and cold as the storm outside. In the underbelly of the building, where the heat pipes snaked through concrete and the lights flickered with every thunderclap, Helen finally felt safe enough to breathe. Down here there were no glass walls, no golden elevators, no eyes watching her every move, at least not the ones that mattered. She found Kwame in the boiler room, sleeves rolled, wiping sweat from his brow. The hum of machinery drowned out most sounds from above. He looked up, saw her expression, and nodded. He didn't need words to know the weight she carried. They spoke quietly, voices nearly lost beneath the clang and hiss of the old systems. Helen told him everything, the threats, the requests, the files she'd hidden, the drive in her cart. She expected disbelief or fear. Instead, Kwame listened with a calm, steady gaze. When she finished, he placed a heavy hand on her shoulder. "You're not alone, Helen. We've all seen too much. It's time they see us." Maria joined them, wringing her hands on her apron. She had her own list of wrongs. Wages withheld, injuries ignored, friends fired for speaking up. Rosa slipped in on her break, eyes darting, bringing news of the security team's unease. Even Mr. Tompkins, gruff and stubborn, shared stories from years back. Audits faked, accidents blamed on the invisible. Quiet alliance began to form, each person adding a piece to the puzzle. They brought out old notebooks, scraps of paper, text messages. They compared stories and times. The pattern was unmistakable. Decisions made in secret, protected by layers of silence, buried under the labor of people like them. They planned in whispers, careful not to trust any one phone or camera. Rosa offered to keep watch during their meetings, Maria to pass messages through the kitchen staff. Kwame mapped out the safe, exits, the corners the cameras never reached. One night, Helen stood before them all, her voice trembling only at the start. "We have the truth. We have each other. We can't let them bury us again." For the first time in her years at the company, Helen didn't feel invisible. The others stood with her, tired but unbroken, carrying years of secrets in their hands. Above them, the storm had passed. The city lights shimmered through basement windows, fractured and golden. For Helen, those lights felt like hope. Could the invisible finally force the world to see? The answer was closer than ever, echoing through the pipes, rattling the bones of the building itself. The days that followed were a blur of tension and calculation. Helen kept her face calm, her movements measured, but inside, her mind raced with strategies and escape routes. She met with the others in the basement late at night, always taking different paths, always careful never to be seen twice in the same place. Then, just as the building began to settle into an uneasy routine, Helen received a summons, this time to the boardroom itself. She was ushered in by Susan, who smiled as if nothing were wrong, as if Helen was just another rising star to be congratulated. The boardroom was silent except for the steady click of the rain against the windows. The CEO was there, along with Susan and Derek. They wore practiced smiles, but their eyes were sharp, searching. Helen sat, her hands folded in her lap, forcing herself not to flinch. The CEO leaned forward. "We've been watching you, Helen. You're resourceful, loyal. We want you to have a real place here, not just a desk, but a future." He slid a folder across the table. Inside, a contract, 6-figure salary, stock options, a corner office, Director of Internal Affairs. Helen glanced at the pages. The offer was generous, unbelievably so. But the subtext was clear. The clause that mattered most was buried halfway down. A non-disclosure agreement, airtight and unbreakable. The price of her new life was silence. Susan smiled. "You'd be helping everyone, Helen. We need people we can trust. People like you, people who know how the real world works." For a moment, Helen let herself imagine it. Financial security, respect, the power to protect her friends. She saw herself in a new suit, leading meetings, never worrying about rent again. Then she remembered Maria in tears over stolen wages, working overtime for his daughter's medicine. Rosa hiding her, anxiety behind small talk. She remembered the photo slipped under her door, the unspoken threat that still made her skin crawl. Helen looked up, steady. "If I sign this, what happens to everyone else?" Derek's voice was cold. "That's not your concern anymore." Helen closed the folder, sliding it back across the table. "Then I guess I'm not your concern either." The silence was long, heavy, broken only by the CEO's measured sigh. "You should think carefully, Helen. Opportunities like this don't come again." Helen stood. "Neither do chances to do the right thing." She walked out, leaving the contract and 3 stunned executives behind. Outside, the city glimmered beneath rain clouds, and Helen felt the burden of choice settle on her shoulders. How much does it cost to buy a person's silence? For Helen, the answer was everything she refused to lose. The air in the building changed after Helen turned down the offer. The greetings grew colder. The stares lingered a fraction too long. Messages stopped coming, and then, slowly, the isolation began. Meeting invites revoked, passwords reset, her badge malfunctioning at random. Helen kept moving through her days, but the unease pressed in on all sides. The allies she'd gathered in the basement felt it too. Kwame was suddenly reassigned to a different building. Maria's hours were cut. Rosa was warned for fraternizing on duty. Mr. Tompkins quietly fixed Helen's badge and left a handwritten note. "Be careful, they're watching." One night, Helen's phone vibrated with a number she didn't recognize. She let it ring, but the message that followed made her heart stop cold. A picture of her little brother, Malik, walking home from his after-school job. No words, just the image, taken from too close, too deliberate. Panic knotted Helen's insides. She called Malik right away. He answered on the second ring, annoyed but safe. "I'm fine, sis." "Why?" Helen told him nothing. She just told him she loved him, her voice shaky, promising herself she would get him out of Chicago for a while, no matter the cost. The next morning, security stopped her at the entrance. "Random check," the guard said, but Helen saw the fear in his eyes. Her cleaning cart was turned upside down. They found nothing. Still, the message was clear. She was being hunted, not just watched. She called the team together, finding them one by one, down in the boiler room, in the shadows of the parking garage, in a quiet booth at the 24-hour diner across the street. They shared stories in whispers, cars tailing them home, strange calls, missed shifts. Even Rosa was rattled. "They want to break us," she whispered. One by one. Helen knew she couldn't keep them safe forever, but she could make sure their story didn't die in the dark. That night, she took the backup drive, the video files, the notes and photos, everything, and copied them to an encrypted stick. Then she wrote a single message to her old friend, Tara, who worked for an investigative journalist she trusted. "If anything happens to me or the others, release this. Full story, all files, names, dates, everything." Helen hid the drive in a place no one would ever think to look. Inside the wall behind a loose panel in the janitor's closet, taped beneath a sticker that read, "Broken, do not use." Sleep didn't come that night. Helen watched the shadows move across her ceiling and listened to the city breathe. She'd spent years becoming invisible, but now her every move left a trace. In the early morning hours, a car alarm shattered the quiet. Helen watched from her window as a dark sedan idled, headlights aimed at her building. She pulled the blinds closed, heart pounding. What's left to lose when you've already risked everything? For Helen, the breaking point wasn't fear. It was the moment she chose not to run. The next evening, Helen arrived early, the city still humming with post-storm humidity. Her chest was tight with fear, but her mind was clear. She wore her uniform for the first time in weeks. Blue shirt, sturdy shoes, name badge that now felt like armor. She moved with purpose, past security, past eyes that didn't meet hers. She made her way to the server room on the 28th floor, a place she'd only entered to clean, never to act. She carried the encrypted USB stick, wrapped in electrical tape, tucked deep in her pocket. At her side, a small headset with a cracked wire, scavenged from lost and found months ago. Helen plugged the USB into the master terminal. The system asked for a password. She entered the one she'd learned from watching Mr. Tompkins, a string of numbers matching the date his daughter was born. The terminal opened, and with trembling hands, Helen uploaded the archive of documents, emails, and security footage, every piece of evidence the invisible workers had risked so much to collect. Then she opened the building's internal broadcast system, the one used for fire drills and all-hands announcements. She patched in her headset, set it to record, and spoke, her voice steady, clear, impossible to ignore. "My name is Helen Johnson. Some of you know me as the night cleaner. Some of you don't know me at all. Tonight, I want you to see what I see." With a few clicks, she broadcast the files, not just to every employee's inbox, but to Tara, her contact at the Tribune, and to 3 major television stations in the city. In seconds, the truth was everywhere. Video of executives shredding documents, audio of threats, records of illegal firings, fraudulent audits, faces, dates, voices, receipts. Alarms erupted across the building. Phones rang, emails pinged, executives swarmed the corridors in confusion and rage. Security raced toward the server room, but Helen had already slipped away, moving down the back stairs, blending into the chaos she'd unleashed. Down in the basement, she found her allies, Kwame, Maria, Rosa, Mr. Tompkins, waiting. The fear in their eyes was replaced by something else: relief, gratitude, awe. "You did it," Maria whispered. "You really did it." Outside, police cars and news vans began to circle the block, their lights painting the lobby in blue and white. Journalists waited, microphones raised, ready to catch any word from inside. For once, the world wanted to hear from the people who'd spent years being ignored. As she walked past the crowd, Helen felt the weight on her shoulders lift, replaced by a raw, unsteady hope. She didn't know what would happen next, if there would be justice or just another scandal quickly swept away. But for the first time, the invisible was seen. Who gets to control the story when the world is finally watching? For Helen, the answer was no longer in the hands of the powerful. It belonged to those who'd been denied a voice. And tonight, she had given it back to them. By dawn, the building was unrecognizable. Police tape stretched across the glass doors. Reporters paced the lobby, their voices urgent, faces flushed with the thrill of scandal. The air was thick with the scent of burned coffee and fear. Executives were escorted out, faces pale and tight, their suits rumpled from a night spent answering questions. Some tried to cover their faces from the cameras, others simply stared, stunned, at the chaos unraveling everything they'd built. Rumors spread faster than the truth, of arrests, resignations, lawsuits brewing behind closed doors. But for the workers, for Helen and those like her, it was less a victory than a strange, silent relief. There were no banners, no cheers, no one to hand them medals, just tired faces meeting tired faces, nodding in quiet recognition. Maria wept, not from joy, but from release. Kwame hugged his daughter in the parking lot, promising her a future without fear. Rosa called her mother back home, her voice trembling with a hope she didn't dare claim. Helen walked the length of the lobby, past the news crews, past security, past the shattered illusion of invincibility that had cloaked this place. For so long, she felt eyes on her, some grateful, some bitter, a few hateful. Her name trended online, mixed with praise and suspicion. Was she a hero or a traitor, a whistleblower or a threat to the company's future? She found herself both protected and exposed. Lawyers called, offering settlements and silence. Activist groups reached out, hungry for a symbol. But all Helen wanted was to feel her own breath, steady and unhurried, without the weight of someone else's secrets. For a few days, she hid, walked unfamiliar streets, dyed her hair, let her phone die out. She watched from a distance as news cycles churned, as statements were issued, as spin and counterspin filled the airwaves. Slowly, life returned to the city. The building, scarred but standing, changed hands. Investigations grew. People moved on, as people always do. Helen reconnected with the others over cheap coffee at a corner cafe. No one talked about the future, only about small things. Maria's new job, Kwame's daughter starting school, Rosa's plans for a second-hand car. They shared laughter and silence, letting the world turn around them. Sometimes the ache of loss gripped Helen, loss of anonymity, loss of the simplicity of being unseen. She missed her old life's invisibility, even as she cherished the new freedom to choose her own steps. But she never doubted what she had done. The cost was steep, her privacy, her safety, her sense of belonging. But in its place, she'd gained something harder to name, a fragile, stubborn dignity, born not of being seen, but of refusing to be erased. Is it worth winning when the world only learns your name through pain? Helen couldn't answer, but she knew she would carry the scars with pride and keep walking, always forward, always visible on her own terms. Months later, the city had changed, but not as much as Helen had. The new owners put up bright banners promising transparency and a new era. Faces in the lobby were different, but the rhythm of the building, the morning rush, the laughter in the break room, the tired hush of the night shift remained the same. Helen no longer carried keys or wore a uniform. She moved freely through Chicago, her steps no longer haunted by fear or shame. Some days she helped at the community center, tutoring immigrants in English or Spanish. Other days she volunteered at the food pantry, listening to stories from people who reminded her of her younger self, hopeful, anxious, determined to survive. Her name still floated on the air in certain circles, sometimes whispered with awe, sometimes with bitterness, sometimes not at all. She didn't chase the spotlight, didn't want it. The world seemed to want heroes, but Helen had learned the cost of being visible. One afternoon, she sat in a sunlit kitchen with Maria making coffee. The radio played quietly in the background. News, weather, then a feature about everyday courage. Maria smiled, squeezed Helen's hand. People see you now. They see all of us. Helen shook her head, a slow, quiet laugh rumbling in her chest. Only because we forced them to look. I just wish they'd look at each other that way. See the woman who brings their mail, the man who fixes the lights, the girl who cleans the bathroom, not just when it's a scandal. Kwame's daughter, now bold and bright, visited that day to show off her school project, an essay about what it means to be brave. She read it out loud, eyes shining. Sometimes brave means speaking up even when you're scared. Sometimes it just means not letting yourself disappear. Later, walking home alone, Helen paused by a mural near her old bus stop. A swirl of colors, faces painted in every shade, each one different, all of them watching. She traced her hand along the wall, feeling the roughness beneath her palm, the heartbeat of the city she'd fought for. She realized then that visibility wasn't about headlines or public thanks. It was about mattering to yourself, about refusing to let the world tell you what you're worth. It was about choosing every day to be present, even when it was easier to hide. That night, Helen stood on her balcony, city lights flickering in the distance. She breathed deep, feeling the weight and the wonder of being seen, not as a symbol, not as a threat, but simply as herself. For the first time in her life, that was enough. Because sometimes the greatest power isn't in what others see, it's in finally seeing yourself.